thanks, Matt, for making the time to jump on this live cast and talk about PR, especially now more than ever. First of all, I want to ask you, how did you end up in this game of PR? And there's a little bit of a story behind how you got started. So why don't you tell us how you got started with 5x5 Global?
Okay, well, I feel like I've literally been in this kind of profession my whole life because my father was in advertising and marketing. And so some of my earliest memories are of him working in the evening round the dinner table, and he was a very hard-working man and built a business up, and it's ultimately the business that now me and my brother run after him and I working elsewhere. We had fairly good careers at WPP networked agencies, and then went back into the business about 16 years ago and set about transforming it really from what was quite a patriarchal founder-led business into more of a contemporary values-led, much flatter business that was more attuned to the modern era.
How long ago was that?
So we took over about 16 years ago, and at that stage we were just a UK business.
Yeah.
And then through various circumstances, I had the opportunity to open an office for us in Los Angeles. We were doing quite a lot of business with video games companies, and entertainment sort of capital of the world is Los Angeles, and that's where a lot of them are headquartered. So I headed over there in right at the end of 2010. Which, for anyone old enough to remember those times as a working person, that wasn't a great time, especially not in the US. They were kind of really suffering with the GFC.
Yeah.
And despite video games being fairly recession-proof, it was still very, very tough trading conditions. So we had a slow start there, but we kind of we saw out that period, and now that business in LA has been thriving really since I left in 2015. I put somebody in charge of it, and came back to Australia, and at that time opened a Sydney office for us.
Yeah, and I had a quick look at your website, and you've worked with some really amazing brands. So how do you get these gigs? How do you build a relationship with these brands to be able to work with them? You've got some very impressive names out there.
Yeah, look, I suppose we were fortunate because when we started in Sydney, we were already over 30 years old as an entity, so we could borrow some case studies and some successes and benefit from some leveraged referrals from clients working in businesses overseas that had offices here locally. So we definitely worked that, but also I appointed and gave shares to a very talented, ambitious young woman who worked alongside me, and I suppose created the incentive then for the two of us to build up the Sydney office, and she did a fantastic job of helping me with delivery. I think that the new business responsibility kind of fairly and squarely rested with me, but I think in any kind of, certainly within marketing services, I've formed the view, because I've done it 2 or 3 times now. I set up an office for Ogilvy in Melbourne with a creative director, so I've definitely formed the view that actually the ideal number to start from day one is 3. You kind of need somebody focused on the new business. You need somebody focused on delivery, and then a sort of a more junior person for taking up the kind of admin side of things. If you can afford it, to start with 3 people is the ideal kind of balance, at least in our sector of marketing services.
So what are some of the most fun campaigns that you've had to work on that you thoroughly enjoyed?
Probably the one that stands out was many years ago now, and it was actually led out of our UK office. I don't know for any sci-fi fans who happen to know a series, a very successful series called Red Dwarf. It was approaching its 10th season, and they wanted to kind of reinvigorate the fan base. And we, so this would be 2000 and maybe 2008. And back then it was actually quite ingenious, but we did a Twitter activated weather balloon that was designed to take a leopard lager and chicken curry to one of the lead characters theoretically in space. And the more tweets we got on the hashtag, the more this weather balloon kind of blew up and ended up going into outer orbit or inner orbit of the Earth's outer atmospheres, all live streamed to the web. And in sort of celebration of this 10th season, when it got to a certain altitude, a banner was revealed to give the date of the first season premiere. So that was a lot of fun, quite innovative at the time, and anyone concerned about the environment, all the apparatus was recovered. I'm not scientific enough to understand how, but by the time the weather balloon burst and everything landed back on Earth, it was only about 60 miles away from where it was released. So yeah, it was even environmentally conscious. So proud about that one, definitely. We did win a Gold Lion at Cannes. We don't put much kind of stock in those kind of industry awards, but that was for a piece we did for Philips, some technology around ambient lighting and sensory kind of magnification of particularly playing video games. So that was a nice recognition at the time. It was around the same time as well. But probably some of the most satisfying stuff is doing the work that we do with founders of small startups, and we're working with startups that are husband and wife, bootstrap businesses, giving it a go, and sinking in life savings. And I think that with that comes great responsibility, but also great pride when you produce work that has an impact for them and sets them on their way. That's very satisfying.
I bet. And startups that are bootstrapped or early stage startups that do need the media exposure doesn't necessarily have the money to pay for it. So what are some of the tips and tools that you would give for a business that's starting or a business that is struggling to build a brand? What are some of the easy things that can be implemented?
Okay, so that's quite a layered question. I think we see a lot of early stage startups that don't have a strong visual identity. Yeah. And I think that's fine to begin with, but you do need to be aware as you kind of mature the business through its sort of pre-launch phases and going for various different investment, that it does start to become it can become a bit of an issue, and it can hold you back. Something as simple as a visual identity. So I try and find somebody that can give you a bit of advice around that. because, as I say, you can start off with something quite naive to begin with, and I would kind of counsel people to not create any kind of, or try and create any kind of icon if they're going to do it themselves, but just simply represent the business name in a clear font that is very, very simple, that doesn't try and kind of convey any kind of misplaced artistic intent. So just go with something really basic for as long as you feel like you know, there's always going to be a lifespan on that, but it's never held anybody back just doing something really basic with just the lettering.
Yeah.
And a standard font. I think I've even seen cases where people have been, you know, distracted to the point of obsession with that aspect. And again, it's a fine line, because it does need to represent a professional and sort of well-intended effort at the market. But yeah, so I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is really the only control that you have over how your brand is experienced is your website. And so again, that's definitely not an area to scrimp and save. I think you know, again, just this week I've seen a business that has come to us for help, and they want to, they're ready to spend. He seems very confident about gaining investment, and he's ready to spend a significant amount of money, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. And luckily, he is aware that he needs to just present himself and his proposition properly on the website, because that, as I say, that's the bit that you can control. You can't control what a journalist or a reviewer or an influencer may say about your product or your service offering. You can't always control the conversation on social. So I think making sure that you put a stake in the ground and something, a piece of communication that you're really proud of, that being your website. And the other thing that we've ended up doing is a lot of the sort of explainer videos.
Yeah.
Again, you know, a really simple thing to get right. And again, you know, it doesn't have to be a hellishly expensive exercise, but the part of that I would definitely not look to save too much money on is the script. If you can pay somebody to articulate and produce and write a script, then I think you can then take that script and then take it to some of these crowdsourced platforms like Fiverr or whatever, and have somebody in a cheaper market produce that for you. If they've got the script, they can't go too far wrong. But pay somebody as much as you can afford to nail your proposition in a script, and have that as your working platform to then go and execute against.
Yeah, and let's talk about what's happening currently and how it's impacted sales for smaller brands and not just startups. So if you have an e-commerce owner, or if you're working in retail, or you're working in fashion, or you've got, you know, mom and dad shop, what are some of the things that we can do now when we are all in lockdown, when the whole world is experiencing this uncertainty, and the first thing that people do is cut down cost, and the marketing budget gets slashed. What do you think is the best way to approach in the current climate? What could people do?
So I think the first thing is, and I wrote about this recently, that I don't think there's been a better time to launch a startup than right now, because the whole landscape is disrupted, and so people have a disrupted predisposition. I think that's the first thing. I think the other opportunity right now is to do some qualitative research, and one of the key steps in our sort of launch planning methodology is this phase of immersion. where we try and walk in our prospective customers' shoes. We experience the product that we're trying to sell them firsthand and very, very deeply. And I think my advice to founders would be to double down on some of that research and discover some of that audience insight and take this time, because again, there are people with a lot more, they're no longer embarking on their commute, so they have a lot more free time and time to invest in answering questions, answering surveys. Just this week I sent one out, and I didn't put any paid spend behind it. It was for our own tech startup that we're attempting to launch in the next couple of months. And some research around pricing. I wanted to know people's tolerance around pricing for the service that we're bringing to market. And so, just having 50 or so responses to that has given me some great insight. So I think you can never have enough of that first-hand feedback from your target market, target audience. In terms of coverage, I think at the moment what we're finding is very, very hard to gain any kind of media coverage. We're trying desperately hard every day to find angles that bring relevance to the proposition around COVID-19 and impact on society and how our product now fits with that. But the journalists in Australia are very relatively small. I think there's stats to say, like, for every one journalist, there's 20 PRs trying to reach them. It was always a tough job. But now with the media agenda being so strongly driven by what's happening on the health and economy side, with that kind of news agenda, it's even harder to gain that coverage. And so we're falling back on some of our paid strategies around paid social to really make sure that we're gaining that reach. I think influencers might be the one kind of area that perhaps is worth people looking at a bit more seriously if they weren't already, and taking this time to develop some of those deeper influencer relationships. Again, just our experience on that is to try and invest the time to find those influencers who are perfect for your brand and for your proposition, rather than go kind of wide and shallow. Go narrow and deep. And so work with 2 or 3 influencers rather than 30 or 40. And so this, again, at this time, I think you'll find that it's actually easier to develop those relationships with influencers and try and get the relationship to a place where a lot more value is being added. For anyone B2B, anecdotal, but in conversations I've had more on the corporate end of our client roster, a lot of B2B sales are actually being facilitated by this period of shutdown. So CIOs and CTOs actually have more inclination, more time, more capacity to actually take a meeting. So for anybody who's looking at kind of the B2B side of things, I think, again, it's a good time to track people down and set up those kind of meetings again. I don't think there's been a better time that I can remember when that availability seems to be there. And again, that's fairly anecdotal, but it's just to pass that on as in case there are people listening who've got that B2B interest.
So when we're selecting influencers, there are so many influencers out there, right? So how do you select an influencer? Is it based on their number of followers, the number of engagement, or how does a brand align themselves with an influencer? What are the things that people should be mindful of?
Well, definitely we look at engagement over reach. even for clients like Lenovo, who we work with on their gaming product range of laptops and desktop PCs. They've taken our advice, and for the last 2 or 3 years worked almost exclusively with 1 or 2 influencers. And they have a profile, but for a brand like Lenovo, there would be plenty of others that would have greater reach. The reason they've stuck with this one influencer is because the relationship has been built on both sides for a period of time, and both parties went into it under the terms of a well-developed contract, which obviously we helped with because we managed that relationship on their behalf. But there was kind of a pure of heart commitment from both parties, and that's helped deepen that relationship. And now there's great value being added to that relationship. The selection was based upon the values of the business and the values this influencer kind of reflected. It was based on the engagement that she had with her audience, and I think that beats reach. But again, taking the time to understand that person's brand fit or intentions. It's those kind of softer measures that I think count for the most. And I think if you as a founder are active within your forums and your communities, some of those connections will actually naturally happen. We never use any of the kind of tools that allow you to operate at scale with influencers. Whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, we take a very manual process to the whole thing. And so again, part of how we're structured to serve clients in different categories, we actually employ people based on their passions and interests over their experience. And so in games, for example, we've got 2 people that play games, if they could, all day long, certainly most evenings. And so they know the ins and outs. They're part of that. They're part of that community beyond their working commitment. And so all of that connective value is much more easily identified and authentically kind of nurtured from the beginning. And that's, I think, probably one of the things that clients love about working with an agency when they have that kind of natural affiliation. They're part of that community beyond their working commitment. And so all of that connective value is much more easily identified. They're part of that community beyond their working commitment. And so all of that connective value is much more easily identified.
I think there is a little bit of feedback coming through.
There's a lag, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to manage the users that are jumping on, and because we couldn't join on LinkedIn,
they're part of that community beyond their working commitment. And so I've got the pleasure of hearing my own voice. Connective value is much more easily identified. They're part of that community beyond their working commitment. And so I'm on a mad loop.
Yeah, there we go. All fixed.
Thanks, Nabi.
Sorry.
Save me the anguish of listening to my own voice.
Oh, I have a question from Carl for you. How does a new style or brand rise above the noise today? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably an enduring question. I mean, 6 months ago, someone could have easily asked me the same thing. I think possibly it's become harder with COVID-19. Certainly hard if your offering has nothing to do with the health emergency or with the kind of economic conditions. Look, I think it comes back to probably two or three things. I think partnerships now are more important than perhaps ever before. I think whether you're a charity or whether you're a social enterprise or a tech startup business, I think you have to be looking for partnerships because there's less money around, and so leveraging each other's networks, reach, and resources. I think partnerships would be a way to try and bring your value to a brand that's perhaps less relevant in these times, and looking for reasons to go to market. I think there's always an opportunity if you've got a founder who's good on camera or gregarious in some way, or a prolific writer, because people are gobbling up opinion pieces at the moment online. So I think prolific content producers will always do well. And I think that's a way to try and get your nose in front during this time. I think we've certainly been helping clients these last couple of weeks kind of pivot their offerings. So two quick examples there. A startup business called Juggle Street that some of you may know. I think they're part of the Fish Burners setup. They've been basically known for their online babysitting match-up service for working parents and local babysitters. And we've helped them develop their pivot to online tutoring. So that will hopefully go live in a short period of time. Talk about one of the things the themes of today's discussion was going to be about bravery. Nabi, I certainly got a lot of respect for those guys who were in the middle of a crowdfunding campaign and pulled the pin on that a long way into that effort, and looked to kind of take stock and then as I say, we helped them with this pivot, but huge kudos to all those founders out there at the moment who've had to reevaluate their offering in order to try and keep moving forward. The other example being Fortress, and again, full respect to those guys. This is the Southern Hemisphere's largest video games and gaming entertainment, not gambling, but video gaming entertainment center in Southern Hemisphere. And they're based in central Melbourne. They spent almost 3 years gearing up for their opening on March the 13th, which was the same day the F1 was cancelled. They had 2,500 people through their venue on the first day, and then had to close their doors 4 days later. And we're helping them move their entire proposition to online now, offering online coaching, making use of their restaurant and doing home delivery, things like that. So that's two ways I think that people are two examples of pivots that are happening. I think there is an opportunity for brands to generate PR. I saw some good stuff that was announced by Accor, where they're giving over hotel rooms to as refuges, basically for to answer the sort of dramatic increase in domestic violence that threatens to destabilize society, and people at risk that now have access to a safe place to stay and to sleep.
Isn't that amazing when we're faced with challenges, the brands that could come up with novel solutions? And I think startups are a lot more used to doing things like that because of just the nature of it. I have a question here from Anna. She's saying, how does one cut through the current climate for corporate teams? So very different to the startup companies, engaging with potential users when developing products. Less observed reach with community consultation through social media. So when you don't have a community, when you're a big company, what do you do in the current climate?
Well, I think you have to leverage your employees. I think there's been, what was I reading yesterday? I think good employee engagement, good solid employee communication, some evidence of the big investment that's gone on lately within corporates of corporate culture and team building and pushing values down through the organization or up from grassroots through an organization. There was a case yesterday where the Maroubra store manager for Coles was called out on social media by the daughter of an elderly man who had his groceries purchased by the store manager because his debit card or credit card didn't work. And you know, I saw that post, and actually the CMO for Coles had commented as well to say how proud she was. You know, I think there's leverage to be gained if your intention from the start isn't based on commercials.
Yeah.
To have that authentic engagement with your employees, to give them the latitude to act in accordance with your values as a brand and organization. I think that's probably the go-to if I was running a corporate organization. That would be where I would go to try and present the business as relevant in these times. I would look to leverage the authority and the position that my employees had to make a difference in a very small way. Actually reminds me of one of the sort of steps that we take when we look at launching anything, is firstly, it's kind of like a reverse funnel almost. So anyone that kind of knows classic marketing will know the kind of broad awareness, top of funnel type stuff, awareness driving activity, and then it kind of narrows to the point of purchase. Well, actually, we turn that on its head, and at the top of our funnel is very, very niche activity designed to engage and expedite a sale by talking directly to very small niches of the population, either geographically or attitudinally, and with a particular, maybe even just a particular part of the product offering. But to address that kind of really pointy focus. And then what you look to do once you have some of those early adopters is to do something that actually can't be replicated at scale. And this is the kind of thing that you start seeing at the corporate level sometimes. So I'm talking about taking extraordinary levels of care for your first initial customers. It might be that they have a personal phone call from the CEO, or they have a song written about them, or something that's actually going to celebrate to a level that you could never replicate or scale as you develop the business, but you go above and beyond to really celebrate those early customers, and that's what then starts to build some of the referral and user generated content that allows you to scale out, and that's that bottom end of the funnel that drives that awareness.
Yeah.
So probably too long an answer. I hope the person who asked that question, I didn't lose them along the way there, but that was
I hope that was helpful, Anna. I want to touch a little bit about the word that gets thrown around a lot is around authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we, as founders or as business owners, show that authenticity and bravery around the brand? What does that even mean?
Yeah, I've got kind of an aversion to buzzwords, and authenticity is kind of like a shorthand that people use, I think, these days.
Like machine learning and AI and blockchain.
Yeah, that's right. Anything with an acronym. Look, I think for anyone in a startup, I think if you don't have authenticity, you kind of lost before you start, really. I think authenticity becomes an issue as you gain scale as an organization. I think most corporates have an issue with authenticity. I think you probably I think authenticity might be more of a challenge for a Facebook than it is for a Snapchat, because of the way those businesses are run and the role that founders play in those businesses. I think so yeah, I think authenticity should never be an issue for a founder-led startup business, because I mean it's actually interesting, because I found myself, so I mentioned before briefly, partly in order to test out our own launch methodologies, partly to show empathy with a fairly big percentage of our client base, which are tech startups. We've done our own tech startup, and it's kind of a case of cobbler's shoes sometimes, where you miss the thing that you are constantly counseling your clients when it's your own thing. Yeah. And I pulled myself up a couple of times to say, why am I writing this confirmation email in the way that CBA might write it?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've been conditioned, because I get these confirmation emails in all my interactions in corporate world now, and I find, now hang on, why am I saying the same thing?
Isn't it funny, Matt? Like when we get onto email, our voice changes. Then we get onto Slack, the voice completely changes, right? Like every platform has this like conditioned voice in our head. So how do you overcome that? Because email is supposed to be like formal. So when you're representing a brand and you're talking to your customers, how do you show your true self?
Well, I think you have to know your true self to start with.
That's very hard.
That's a whole different webinar.
So I want to go on to the next point is, leading with your heart, because the brand has its own identity, right? And you're representing the voice of that brand. And a lot of the times a founder's authenticity is intertwined with the brand, and it's kind of like becomes one at some point, depending on the kind of business. How do you represent a brand and not make it sound like CBA or the big corporates, but to show that human touch? What can business owners do to be really, really true to themselves and to the brand that they're creating?
Well, there's a bit of test and learn in some of that. I think if you start off talking to your customers one-to-one in social environments, I think you quickly learn, what's appropriate, what isn't. I think there are very few founders who aren't living and breathing day in, day out, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, their venture. They're either financially committed, emotionally committed, or both. They need to be both, really. And so, you're going to be paying attention. I think the danger can be that you pay too much attention.
Yeah.
And and you get a little bit, you kind of second guessing yourself, and you I think it happens by increments. You kind of gradually lose your way, and you one day you're like, hang on, why, I've never said kind regards before in my life. Why am I, or fondest regards? What the hell? How did I get here?
Who came up with this stuff?
So yeah, but it's easily done, I think, and I'm not a great believer in having your values written up on a bloody wall, and I don't have what's that, life, laugh, love, or something on your mantelpiece at home. None of that stuff, kind of thing. I think you have to rely on your not necessarily needing daily reminders for that, but that's just me. I think one of the exercises that we do when we do kind of branding is to make sure that people set off with maybe only two or a very maximum three kind of values. I think, and to try and make those as unique and non-generic as possible. Yeah. For 5 by 5, we were kind of naturally given our values because of the name. So for those that don't know, 5 by 5 is a term used to describe the strength and clarity of a communication signal. Yeah. So 5 by 5 basically means perfect strength, perfect clarity, or loud and clear. And so we use that as a kind of mantra, if you like, for the way we conduct ourselves, for the kind of people that we hire. We make it clear that's what clients can expect from us and our work. And so those two things, and I think honestly, if it was three things, I wouldn't be able to remember. And let alone my staff being able to remember. If it was like positivity, fun, and whatever, it's just kind of like just a yawn fest.
It's challenging, being authentic, putting yourself out there, being found out, imposter syndrome, and all of these things come up, right? So how do you build confidence it's easy to hide behind a brand. It's a lot harder to put yourself out there, and that requires a certain level of confidence. And founders that have or business owners that have not had a lot of practice in speaking to the public or speaking to the community, and in times like this, that is one of the best ways to connect with your audience, right?
Yep.
What can business owners do to build that confidence to speak to the audiences?
Well, I think journalists certainly always want to hear from founders. They're not necessarily ever wanting to hear from the mouthpiece, the PR agency, or or anybody else other than the founder. I think if you have a difficulty, this is going to sound like a massive name drop, right? But I think I've told you this story before, Nabby. I had the distinct privilege of meeting Evan Spiegel. He came to Sydney, and at very short notice, we were invited to meet with him, as us and I think 6 other agencies. And he kind of had this reputation of a bit kind of awkward, kind of socially awkward kind of person. And we made the decision that when we met him, we were going to make the whole thing just start immediately talking about his product and Snapchat and the platform and what we thought of it. And he arrived, was very gracious, and was completely at ease from the start, because we talked to him. We didn't blow any hot air up his arse or anything like that. It was just purely straight into the conversation around his product and the challenge that one of his team had asked us to think about. And the hour just went like that, and he was super engaged, and we ended up doing a little bit of work together. So that was a success. But this was somebody who was comfortable and very passionate, obviously, about the one thing that he wanted to talk about. He didn't want to have 6 conversations with 6 agencies about LA or the share price or whatever. So I think the lesson from that is that if you have the passion and the knowledge of your product, there will always be somebody who can bring out the extrovert in you, even if it's 1% of your personality, because that's an area of comfort when it comes to the conversation. So yeah, I don't know. Does that help answer that question?
I mean, I can relate to it to some extent. I'm actually a very introverted person, and I do a lot of public speaking, despite my introvert mechanisms. And I find it hard I don't even like social events unless it's work. So I kind of like hide behind my brand. And then also I juggle between, is this Nabi or is it Cover Hero? And then I realized, and this was kind of challenging for me, was, well, the ideas and the creativity comes from me. So therefore there has to be an element of me in the brand at a really, really deeper level. And then I struggle with, like, how do I separate these two things? Like, I am not the brand. The brand stands on its own, but then a brand is also human, and there are ideas in there. So it took me many years to even publicly talk, and I used to be terrified of speaking. I used to be terrified of even this session. I was like getting a little bit of like anxiety attack. Oh my God, we're going live. I've never done live session. What's people going to think about this? What if we mess it up? And then LinkedIn didn't work, and I'm like trying to juggle so many things. And the way for me to overcome that was like not care, right? Like give it a try and be open for learning, and that we'll make lots of mistakes. And I think, Matt, yesterday you and I talked about this when we were preparing for this, is like, I just want everything to be perfect and beautiful and magical, and to get there it takes a long time, so better do it half done. And what was your response to me on that one?
Yeah, I think I said something like, I think you're worrying too much. I think the important thing is to get it done and not worry if it's half done or full done or well done. I think founders are used to working in a high risk environment. Most of the time they put a lot on the line, and yet still things can be intimidating. And I think one of the things that can help put that kind of layer of confidence in when we talk about our businesses and help us kind of extricate the personal from it is if we have quite a well-refined, easy to understand explanation of what the business is and what it does. And I still see a lot of even sort of definitely pre-seed businesses and seeded businesses that don't have that solid articulation of what their offering is. And if you nail that can actually give you a lot of confidence, because in conversation somebody goes, okay, I get it, oh, that's interesting, and then the conversation takes care of itself. If your explanation goes for longer than 10 seconds and you see the kind of confusion in people's faces, that's naturally going to shake your confidence in maintaining that kind of conversation, because you're already on the back foot.
Yeah.
So find a way to summarize what you're doing in 2 sentences, I think, and you're away.
It takes a lot of practice to make things succinct, right? And simplify ideas. It's a lot easier to like just keep babbling on and on and
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But to put in a minute or 30 seconds is a lot harder than writing 1,500 word blog post.
Yeah, well, there's a formula, right? That is an articulation of who the target is, what that target mindset is, what the frame of reference is for you and them, or the product and them, and then the kind of reasons why you're different. So we build that up as kind of like a brand positioning statement that actually isn't ever designed to be external, but from that you can usually take your kind of elevator pitch. So yeah, it's formulaic. There's an approach to it that I think works pretty consistently.
So, out of all of the brands that are out there, and I'm sure you keep on top of all of the trends that are happening around the world, what are some of your personal brands that you like, and why?
Wow, good. I haven't been asked that question since I went for an interview in 1997. Look, I mean, obviously the brands that are going to emerge from this period of disruption.
Mm-hmm.
I think the ones that are going to emerge strongest will be the ones that have taken care of their employees first of all. That's most important. Secondly, I think those that have managed the customer communication the best. I mean, gosh, I can't be alone. Everybody on this call must have just become so fatigued with the kind of COVID-19 comms from brands that you'd never even realized you'd given your email address to. So I think those brands that have kind of managed this period well with their customers, understanding what their customers are wanting from them.
Yeah.
I'm always kind of interested in the alcohol brands. I was chatting to a finance director in a very large alcohol distributor just 2 weeks ago. If I were you, I'd start prepping for communication around that goes one step further beyond drink responsibly, and actually helps people ensure that they aren't taking this time to go down the path towards a drinking problem that that is going to cause its own health crisis. I think there's enormous equity to be generated by those alcohol brands. I mean, I'm guilty of having a few beers during the week now, where I previously wouldn't have. And I think probably it's commonplace for most businesses to try and do some kind of social drink at the end of the week on a hangout or a Zoom call or something.
Yeah.
But those are the flags that we've got to be kind of aware of, and I think that category I'm really interested in, not only because we've got a few clients in that category, but I think it's kind of like there's a massive brand opportunity to actually counsel people and demonstrate the responsibility that's so far been like a sign off on advertising, rather than something that's truly been adopted for the common good, social good.
Yeah. So let's talk about quickly what's ahead for 2020. Do we write 2020 off, or how do we get through the next stages? The first stage was the toilet paper hoarding that came, and then everyone went into shutdown, and we're evolving and adjusting to this new norm, and people, and Zoom has suddenly become very popular for people that have never heard of Zoom. What we do moving forward in terms of customer engagement, building the brand, amplifying the brand? What are some structured approaches for the next 6 months, let's say? What can business owners do now that the hysteria is kind of died down slightly? Where do we go from here?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's a shift occurring, certainly in the people that I'm talking to, where people are now not seeing this period as a window in time. There's nothing that the perception is that we're not going to go back to something. This isn't like a period of inconvenience that then is suddenly we're going to go back to normal, whatever. I mean, and not that normal was that great anyway, with homelessness and issues issues that define society, you know, prior to all of this. But it's a shift, I think, occurring in people's realization that we're going to have to take the best from this and the best of us from pre-COVID, and there'll be a new normal that doesn't really resemble the old normal. So I think as far as businesses are concerned, I mean, us personally, we've tried always to plan two orders of magnitude ahead of the situation and act one order of magnitude ahead of the situation. So I think I announced 3 weeks ago, all our staff had agreed to a 20% pay cut. We were proactive in talking to clients about projects on the assumption things were going to be shelved, and went with alternative kind of solutions. And as a business, internationally, you know, there's a significant dip in our revenues because advertising, marketing is obviously one of the first things that gets cut. The risk is obviously that by going into hibernation, you lose share of voice at a time when your competitors are equally kind of closing down their comms as well. And so the point of that we're trying to obviously encourage our clients is a responsible reevaluation of what their marketing activity is, how it relates to the current situation. And I think we've gone through certainly a number of phases already, one of which was to reinforce government advice around staying at home. I think the thing that will need to be kind of challenged in the coming weeks and months will be anxiety, uncertainty around the return to whatever this new normal is. And I don't think it will be a date in time. I think it will be a graduation period. So it will be a challenge. I don't think there's going to be a set of guidelines that can be issued. One of the things that we're looking at is, because of our focus on launch, is to actually think about a workshop or probably a mural template that we help people with the concept of relaunch. And I talked about it before, but I think this is an ideal opportunity to be gathering customer insight, market intelligence, qualitative research from people who you want to be using your product, buying your product or service. So as you know, the scale back to 100% is well managed, because you've got a continuance of information and insight from the people that you're supposed to be talking to.
Well, that was quite an insightful for discussion, Matt. I thank you so much for taking the time, and I think we're just right on the dot on 1 o'clock, even though we were a little bit late and we had some technical challenges. Um, so before we finish off, so I have a few questions for you, Matt. Is it business as usual for you guys? And I know there are some changes that you've made. If startups or small businesses want to get in touch with your team, what can they do?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. We are business as usual. I'm trying to encourage my guys to take a bit of annual leave over this Easter period because it has been pretty full on emotionally and work wise for everybody. But yeah, we never stop kind of turning the wheels. So it's actually a lot of our startup clients that are, whether it's because they're forced to through the terms of the investment they've secured or because there really is no alternative, all our startup clients are just keeping on. And so we've been very busy with them. Some of the corporate clients have slowed their spend or paused. But again, we're relatively protected from that because we're doing a lot of work in particularly in video games, which are obviously making hay at the moment. Gosh, everybody's playing games, it seems.
Good time to start a video game company or make video games, right?
That's it, yeah. So yes, no, happy to talk to anyone and offer some initial help that goes beyond what ramblings I've divulged today.
I thoroughly enjoyed
much
the
better one-on-one.
You've got to nail your elevator pitch, man.
I probably do, yeah. Cobbler's shoes, like I told you, cobbler's shoes.
Very, very helpful, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Stay safe, everyone. Yeah, all the best.
Yeah, and look forward to talking to you again. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Abby.